So, welcome everyone. My name is Scott Lyons. I'm the host of the Mind Body Therapy Summit. Welcome to our fifth and final day of it. I can't believe how quickly it's gone. It's amazing. And we're so grateful to have each and every one of you here, and especially Nikki Myers, who is just a fabulous presenter and human being. And every time I get to talk with you, Nikki, I think I fall in love with you a little bit more. To say. The first time I was like, who is this angelic being of wisdom? And so thank you so much for coming back. This session, everyone, is called Connecting the Dots: Addiction, Trauma, Race, and Yoga. All right. And with that, I'm going to read Nikki's bio. As an accomplished speaker and teacher, Nikki is an MBA, ERYT 500, yoga therapist, somatic experiencing practitioner, addiction recovery specialist, and Ayurvedic specialist. Born from her struggles with addiction and work with countless students, Nikki is the founder of Y12SR, Yoga for 12-Step Recovery. And is just an incredible human being, I have to say. So, Nikki, without further ado, I will pass it to you. And thank you again so much for being here and bringing your wisdom.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I am so deeply grateful and honored to be a part of this gathering, right? I know you guys have already been meeting for a couple of days, and I've seen and no, I haven't had the opportunity to listen in to any of the talks. I hope to get a chance to do that. But Dr. Lyons has invited some stellar, incredible human beings to be a part of this conference, a few of which are my teachers. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I give a more full introduction to myself a little bit later on. But I'm just grateful and thankful to be a part of this and to be here with you in this moment. And before I get into the depth of our subject matter, I do want to acknowledge the moment, right? Acknowledge this present moment. I am currently in Huntsville, Alabama. I actually live in Indianapolis, Indiana, but I'm here for a graduation ceremony and really grateful for that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful day. I'm staying at a lovely little Airbnb and everything's just beautiful right in this moment. And and a lot of what we'll talk about as we move through this presentation material is the right? Noticing the and building container and capacity to hold the and. So it's true. It's a beautiful day. I'm celebrating all of those kinds of things. And we're the midst of a vile pandemic, a vile virus. Here where I am in the United States, more than 600,000 people here in the US alone have died as a result of this pandemic, and it's running rampant in many places in the world. In my beloved India, which I've been to countless times and done a lot of study, it breaks my heart about what's going on there. And we're in the midst of an opioid crisis, right? And, you know, there's an impending climate crisis, right? And I do want to go back. I just received yesterday some updated figures from the Center for Disease Control here in the United States relative to opioid deaths in the United States. And it looks like the number of opioid deaths, I don't know, Scott, I'm hearing something, I don't know if someone's mic is on or something. Well, I'm hearing something in the background. Hopefully you guys aren't. So,
I got it covered.
oh, perfect. I love it. I love it. So we're speaking about the opioid crisis and these new figures that I just got yesterday from the CDC. And there's some preliminary numbers about opioid deaths in the United States. And it looks like that the number of overdose deaths is going to top 90,000, right? Compared to 70,630 in 2019. And that number, 90,000, right? That would be the highest annual number ever recorded on record, right? The single biggest percentage increase in the last 20 years, in the last 20 years, right? And so that's astounding. We're still in the midst of all this. And there's the crisis of white body supremacy, right? The crisis of whiteness, which we will speak to just a few minutes more. And what I'll actually say relative to that and assert is that there's a relationship between all the pandemics and the crisis of whiteness, right? So, in just speaking this and talking about this, I know how my body feels, right? There is this and even in my own body as I speak to the all the pandemics, the multiple pandemics that we're in this moment. There's a feeling that quickens in my body. There's a heat that arises. I love to describe it like an army of swarming ants, right? That there's a tightness in my jaw, right? All of those things are true. I recognize that I have a nervous system that is dysregulated, even as I hold a little joy, even as I hold a little celebration, right? Right. And part of this journey for me is how I can build capacity to hold it all. How can I build container and capacity to hold all of those things? And we'll speak to that, right, in just a few moments. So, I love to think about these things, even though there's been a little relief related to many of the things that I just spoke about, a little relief. We heard some pretty good news relative to some climate stuff, right? That's happening on a pretty systemic level earlier in the week. There's been, in the United States at least, a lot of relief relative to the coronavirus. And we can't confuse relief with resolve, right? And this is one of the big things with healing addiction. We can't confuse relief with resolve, right? So, as we begin this conversation, again, I want to acknowledge that my nervous system is still a little unsettled. And I love saying that up front, right? Part of that is, truth is, I really can't fathom how anyone has a regulated nervous system in the midst of all this, right? This is global, and it's the stuff that I'm going through, and a lot of other people are as well. It helps me to name that, right? Especially as it relates to me. One of the things that you'll hear me say over and over and over again in relationship to all this as it deals, and especially in the work with substance and behavioral addiction, you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. You cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. So telling the truth about this first allows an opening and a possibility that healing can enter. Without doing that, there's just no possibility, right? The possibility is closed. All right. So again, it's important for me to acknowledge that about me. It's important for me to recognize that most people I interact with are also coming from a state of a dysregulated nervous systems, given the condition, right? And that does something. right? There's a softening that occurs there, again, that opens up possibility, that opens up a possibility. So with that said, right, and we'll come back to those two things, relief and resolve are distinct, and you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. We'll circle back around to these things as we get a little deeper into the conversation. I also want to, acknowledge and where I am location wise and locate myself. I was saying I'm in this little nice little Airbnb in Alabama, but I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. And wherever I speak, I acknowledge the land that I stand on. I don't know the history of the land that I'm on in this moment. I'm just here for the weekend. But what I know is that if you're in the United States, you're standing on stolen land. You're standing on stolen land, right? The indigenous people of the Miami and Potawatomi communities stewarded the land that I live on in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was their land, right? And as my buddy Resma Minicum says, and I love this quote, and then something happened, and something continues to happen, right? Dominant culture has purpose to invisibilize those things. And again, remember, you can't heal what you don't acknowledge, right? So bringing those things forward is part of the healing for all of us, right? And then I also love acknowledging my ancestry. I come from a people who were kidnapped and enslaved, tortured, lynched, mass incarcerated, and terrorized. And there's that and again, whose resilience and brilliance and creativity and daring fortitude fuels my very soul and has fueled the country that I live in, right? For decades and decades and decades, right? And I'm deeply grateful and honored for all that, right? And then there are all my teachers, and there's so many. I'm not gonna really go through the whole list, but this is for a particular purpose, right? A lot of my healing comes through the 12-step program, right? It's been a tremendous force in this journey of healing addiction for me. And of course, the program I founded is the Yoga of 12-step recovery, right? So the founders of the 12-step program are fondly known as Dr. Bob and Bill W., right? And so acknowledging and thanking them is very important to me. And then there's this yogic path, right? So a lot of the teachings that I've received have been through the path of the Krishnamacharya lineage. My direct teacher has been Gary Kraftsoul, right? I love that, one of my direct teachers. And I always so honored that the teachings that I've received are so very close in that lineage. Gary's teacher was TKV Desikachar, which is Krishnamacharya's son. Gary actually lived in Krishnamacharya's house. And so I'm just so honored that that direct lineage, I've been able to receive those teachings. There's Sean Corn, right? Many of you will know her. She's my forever sister, collaborator, mentor. We do a lot of things together, including a program that's called Race in America, which is really a deep, immersive look at racialization, right? And its impact on everyone and everything, right? And so I'll tell you more later about where you might find out more about that particular program. Also, Sadhguru Vagi Jasudev, who's the spiritual leader of Isha Foundation, Panditji Rajmani Tiganayat, who is the spiritual leader of the Himalayan Institute, where I do a lot of study. Dr. Peter Levine, right, my teacher and work in somatic experiencing. Father Richard Rohr, who's the founder of the Center for Contemplative, Contemplation and Action. And there's so many more. It is important for me to offer these acknowledgments because I've learned two things that I must cultivate for my own healing and for my own recovery, right? In this recovery path from trauma, addiction, the whole 9 yards, is I have to cultivate gratitude and radical honesty. Gratitude and radical honesty, right? And honoring my ancestors and my teachers and being radically honest about where things come from help me to stay on this recovery path. So wherever I'm speaking or teaching or in that context, whether I'm speaking in a church basement or a medical school or conference or convention, right? I introduce myself the same way. The running joke, excuse me, the running joke has always been, if I was speaking at Harvard Medical School, I would introduce myself the same way. And 3 years ago now, I really spoke at Harvard Medical School, right? So I had the opportunity to do the deal, just like I said I was, and I did, right? And I start this way. I'm Nikki. I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a codependent. I am the survivor of both childhood and adult sexual trauma. I'm a love addict. I am a former commercial sex worker. I am a recovering debtor spender and, and there's that and again, right? And I'm an MBA. I'm a yoga therapist. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. I'm an Ayurvedic yoga specialist. I'm a patent holder, even though the patent's now expired. I'm the founder of Y12SR. I'm the mother of 2 living and 1 deceased child. I'm the grandmother of 5. I'm actually the great grandmother of 3 incredibly beautiful great grandchildren. And again, I love saying all of that in the same sentence, connected by that and, right? And I don't introduce myself this way for, as Sonia Renee Taylor says, this isn't inspiration porn, right? That's not the reason that we're doing that, right? It's that I've discovered this. All of those experiences are a part of my being. And when I ignore, deny, pretend, create any kind of pretense around any part of it, or if I make one part bad and awful and wrong, and another part right and wonderful and praiseworthy, then there's a split because all of that's here, right? And if I create that tension between those sides, right, what happens is a fight erupts. There's an internal war that erupts inside. And so the healing process for me has been reintegrating all these parts, fragments of myself that I've left here, there, and everywhere, right? Reclaiming all of those parts of myself, recognizing that there is no good, bad, right, wrong, inferior, superior, right? Bringing all of those parts back in. Right. This always reminds me, I always say the older I get, it seems like the more my favorite movies are Pixar cartoons. That's right. But there was this one that was introduced several years ago called Inside Out, right? And I always suggest anyone who has an opportunity, just go look at that movie because it explains in a way exactly what I'm talking about, right? If there's a piece of me that is disintegrated, right, are left hanging out there, denied, ignored, then it comes out sideways. It comes out sideways. So part of the healing has been reintegrating all parts of myself, right? And there's that and again. Once there is integration, then there comes the possibility of recognizing that while all of these experiences are an integral part of my human experience, the truth is none of them define me. None of them define me. I'm human, and all of these are part of the human experience. And I'm something much, much more, right? So, for just a moment, I want to invite you into a little pause, right? Just a a little pause to check in at every level, right? And, just a little inquiry question. Are there fragments of you waiting to be integrated? Waiting to come home, waiting to come home. Maybe there's an inquiry there in some way for you. Maybe there's an inquiry, right? For all of us, for all of us. All right, so that brings us to a piece of this I want to bring and show as a slideshow presentation, right? Again, as we look at this from another perspective. So hang on 1 second here. I am going to show my screen. Yay. All right. All right. So this is coming from yoga philosophy, right? And even the philosophy that yoga is based on. And that philosophy is called Sankhya, right? So we're going to talk about Sankhya. Sometimes you'll even hear Sankhya called Sankhya yoga, right? Philosophy yoga is based on. And we're going to start this from this big picture overview. And really, the rest of this whole presentation is organized really the way that I learned in 12-step programs. The first, we have to look at the problem. Then we can look at solution. And then we can develop a program of action. Problem, solution, program of action. I love to organize all my presentation materials here. So we're going to start with a big picture overview from Sankhya philosophy, really about the problem and the joy, right? The hope behind it, right? So it starts here. Sankhya philosophy speaks about a model of creation that describes what's called 23 or 24, depending on how you look at it, evolutes, right? And we're not going to go through all of those, right? However, Sankhya says it starts right here with Purusha and Prakriti, right? So Purusha is consciousness and Prakriti is energy. Prakriti is energy. And through that vibration of consciousness and energy, what came from that is pure light. It's pure love, right? This is the cause of our existence. Pure light, pure love, pure consciousness, which is always there. This is the substratum out of which everything evolves, right? And then if you follow the evolutes down, sooner or later, you get to the 5 elements, the gross elements of materiality: earth, water, fire, air, and space, right? The gross elements of materiality. And then if we take that and put it into a model that's introduced in the Taittiriya Upanishads called the Panchamaya Kosha model, generally known as the 5-body model. And I'll come back to that. We'll describe it in a little more detail a little later on in the presentation, a little more fully then. But if we just layer that in here, we come up with something like this, right? We are an individuation of pure light, of pure love, pure consciousness, an individuation of wholeness extracted from wholeness, of love extracted from love, right? That comes in here manifesting as 5 layers, right? And that's the 5-body layer, right? And those bodies get more dense as you move outward, right? Versus the body of heart, the heart body, the spiritual heart, joy, love, bliss, right? And then there's the character body, if you will, right? The Vijnana Maya Kosha, right? And then from there, there's mind, and then there's energy. And then we get to the most dense, the physical body itself. So as we come into this individuation, we come in with other individuations, right? And we come into the world. Then there is the world, right? The rest of all of this materiality. And how we perceive the world is through our 5 incoming senses, right? The only way in is via our 5 senses, right? And how we interact with the world is through our 5 outgoing senses. So the ancients speak of 10 senses rather than 5. They're the 5 incoming systems, and how we interact senses, and then how we interact with the world is through our 5 outgoing systems. So over time, what happens, and we really will see how this can pass down through generations, right? Over time, we absorb what comes into the world via our senses. And we start to become conditioned by what comes in the world. And when we do that, we build constructs and concepts that become the fundamental building blocks of our behaviors and our attitudes. For example, the world says fear, right? And I love one of the things I got from 12-step program, right? This is where at least I first heard it, right? Fear at its base is not getting what you want or losing what you have, right? So in the fear of losing our money, in the fear of losing our person, our significant other, or being unable to get the job, right? Because of a belief that there are too many of those people coming into my country, right? Right, right. These conditionings begin to come in. And, let's look at that, right? Let's look at that fear that's built in, for example, to the construct of race. Race is, of course, a construct, right? There was this project called the 1619 Project, and I listened to most of the podcast, and they would always start the podcast this way, and I loved it. They said, I was made Black by someone who considered themselves to be white, right? The idea of race and racial superiority and inferiority is a construct that was created to justify unequal treatment. So constructs, conditioning, habitual thinking, all of these in yoga are known as samskara. Samskara. And according to the ancients, There's even a deeper level of samskara that's called vasana, right? And so these are things that could be passed intergenerationally, right? These are things that are so deep. They're more than the consciousness, the conditioning of this moment, right? So deep, right? So as we become bombarded with conditioning from the world, and we have to be if we're here. That's part of the human deal, right? As we become bombarded with this conditioning, we collect samskaras and vasanas, and they become a part of culture, right? Culture are the customs and the institutions that define society. Samskaras and vasanas block the light of awareness, right? So I love this. So if you continue to look at this little thing, there's the samskaras and vasanas that are coming in, all the conditioning, all the beliefs and attitudes, behaviors that come in via our five senses, right? And the idea is that these things block light. They block the light of pure awareness. So I reference the network of samskaras and vasanas to the matrix, the matrix, right? And what the matrix is, right? I love to speak about it in this way. The matrix is the binary, socially constructed framework that's built on opposites. It's built on good, bad, right, wrong, inferior, superior, success, gain, better, worse, win, lose, right? Binary qualities that are set up to justify superiority. And the systems, the structures that are built within the matrix are constructed to uphold this superiority. So, school systems, healthcare systems, criminal justice systems are all maintained by the operating system of the matrix, right? And I assert the operating system of the matrix is whiteness and white body supremacy, right? So, what is that? What is that? Right? So, whiteness, as I refer to it, is the implicit culture, the norms, the standards, the beliefs, the attitudes, and behaviors that uphold any kind of supremacy. It's the systemic programming of the delusion of superiority. And I very specifically use that word delusion here because when we speak about addiction, one of the base definitions of addiction is the illusion or delusion of control, the delusion of control, the delusion of power and control, right? So in the matrix, the white body is the norm. It's the standard for being human. And everything else is a deviation from that norm. And remember, as we can see, the matrix blocks light. The matrix blocks light. It blocks love. It blocks pure consciousness. So I want to stop the side presentation here, right? And invite you to just take a moment here and ground, right? And root and ground and just notice what's present in your body in this moment, right? What's present in your body. And more than anything external, notice what's present in the inner dimension, right? I love that thought. We're citizens of two worlds. There's an inner world and there's an outer world, right? And when I really become anchored from the internal, things show up a whole lot differently in the external. right? Anchored in the internal, right? There's difference, right? Really examining this condition. And it's not easy, right? We say it's simple and it's not easy, right? And it's not easy. So take a moment and root and ground, right? And then feel what's touching the earth. Look around the room, right? Orient yourself to the space. It's easy to time travel. We'll talk about time traveling in just a few moments. Really easy to time travel in these conversations. And then I want to invite you to take a big, deep breath in and exhale and let it out. Right. And here is really how we work with the pause, right? I love that idea, the pause, right? It's in that pause where there's a possibility to take a different pathway, right? A different neural pathway, right? Instead of going down the neural pathway of being defensive or any of those kinds of things, in that pause and coming back to present, there's a possibility for something else, right? A possibility, such a valuable tool, right? And here's the good news. Yoga offers us a way to work through and actually metabolize samskara and vasana. It offers us ways to increase pranic flow and to remove what the Yoga Sutras speak of as the colorings of the mind, the colorings of the mind. So I want to show you one more thing about the binary matrix. So I'm going to show this another slide here. It's called the feelings chart, right? It's called the feelings chart. So again, this is an idea of how the binary matrix operates. This comes from a treatment center. I've done work at a ton of treatment centers over the course of my time of working in this field. And this one's one of my favorites. It's absolutely one of my favorites. It is a treatment center in a small town in Texas called Buffalo Gap, Texas. And the treatment center is called Shades of Hope. And their real focus and specialty has to do with eating disorder, right? So anorexia, bulimia, food addiction, right? All of those kinds of things. That's their real focus. But one of the things I love about this treatment center is you're going to get at root, right? You're going to get at root, right? They do deep work to get at root. So this is the feelings chart, and the founder and executive director there, a woman named Tenny McCarty, uses this chart whenever there's a group of clients gathered. And they would also use this to go deep in Family Week when we would do Family Week there. So this chart names 7 feelings. And those feelings that they call out here are anger, fear, pain, loneliness, shame, guilt, and joy, right? And this is not to say that these are the only 7 feelings, right? There's spiritual work like the Course in Miracles, though, as we think about it, that says there are only 2, that there's love and fear, and that everything else is a derivative of love and fear, right? But this chart points out and points toward 7, right? And this is, again, right, the idea of this really at its heart is that feelings don't fit in a binary matrix of good, bad, right, wrong. A feeling is energy, and the nature of energy is to move, right? Emotion is energy in motion. The nature of energy is movement, right? And when it moves, it creates one result. When it doesn't, it creates a different result, right? So you see here the feeling, the second chart, the second column there says carried or denied can produce, right? So if this feeling is carried or denied, denied's pretty easy. We talk about this in 12 step. I've always loved it. We say denial's an acronym. It's an acronym that stands for don't even know I'm lying. When I'm in denial, I don't even know I'm lying, right? Carried, though, is something different, right? And we can go back to this. If it's repressed or denied, there's pretense around it. Any of those things I was speaking about a little bit earlier. Carried, though, it doesn't even have to be yours. It might be a feeling that gets carried and passed down intergenerationally, right? It may not even be yours. Yet, if it's carried, denied, repressed, ignored, it produces one result, right? And the feeling has a gift. A feeling is not good or bad or right or wrong, right? That if it's allowed to move and do what feelings do, then there's a gift there, right? So we can see this here. Anger that's carried or denied will turn into rage, right? And anger has a gift, right? It's energy. It can be motivation. It can be strength allowed to move, right? Fear that's carried or denied can create panic or paranoia, right? But if it's allowed to move, there's wisdom, there's protection there, right? There's protection in the fact that I fear stepping in front of a moving car, right? Right. So again, all of these things, and that's the idea, to point this out, right? That a feeling, and a lot of times where stuckness occurs is when we try to hold on to a feeling, right? Instead of allowing a feeling to do what feelings do. I usually use this image. As a matter of fact, if I look on my computer right now, there's the Earth. I got an image of the Earth spinning in space because that's what's happening. This moment, we're standing on a rock that's spinning in space, right? We're standing on a rock that is spinning in space, right? So for me to try to stop a feeling, it's like I'm trying to stop the rock from spinning the face. The feeling wants to move, right? And for me to grasp it, hang on to it, right? Try to stop it, recreate it over and over and over again to stop it from moving, right? It's like me trying to stop the rock from spinning in space. Good luck with that. Good luck with that, we always say, right? And this is really at the base. It really is at the base of many things, right? Particularly relative to addiction, and especially relative to an addiction to power and control, right? My mentors in this work always say that when you're really healing addiction at its root, what you're healing is an addiction to power and control, this delusion of control, right? So we are going to, delve into another topic, right? Into this whole thing, trauma, addiction and trauma. So I want to invite you to keep everything that we've just spoken of, in the background, keep it in your mind as we shift to this conversation around trauma, right? So, and we're going to talk about this in terms of addiction, right? Um, Addiction is a disease, right? It's a disease that affects the master controller of our entire nervous system, right? And of course, that's the brain, right? Addiction is a chronic disease, right? And I make that statement, right? Because there's always been this long-standing argument about addiction. Is it a disease or the way it's said in the one of the key texts of the 12-step program, right? The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that says, is it a disease or is it a moral deficiency? Is it a moral deficiency? And ultimately, that what that is nature nurture. Is it nature or is it nurture? And personally, I've never understood why that's an argument, right? Why is it not both? Right? Why is that not an and? Right? Why do we have to continually categorize it in that way? Addiction is definitely a disease. As I said, it affects the master controller of the entire nervous system. And it does involve choice. But so do many other chronic diseases involve choice, right? Type 2 diabetes, I could argue, involves choice, right? Heart disease, blood pressure, all of those things involve choice and are recognized as a chronic disease, right? Yet addiction is stigmatized in a way that other chronic diseases are not, right? And one of the things that we assert in this work for healing is that the destigmatization of addiction and really all mental health diagnosis has to happen. That this is such an important part of it, right? It's an important component of healing. Until the destigmatization occurs, people who may be, they won't be as willing to come forward and get the help that is available, right? In many ways, addiction is more treatable than many other of the chronic diseases. Once you admit you have it, right? Once you admit you have it, it's very treatable, right? But it occurs because of destigmatization, right? Because of stigmatizing. People are not willing to come forward and get the help that's available. So part of this work is in destigmatization and the destigmatization of that. All right. So in that, as we have that conversation, I am going to bring up another slide. Hang on for 1 second here and talk a little more deeply about this dis-ease of addiction. So I want to bring up some clinical definitions of addiction. And really, I'm going to focus on one here. Using this work, I have several listed on this slide, and all of them talk about addiction as a dis-ease of the nervous system, right? Particularly of the reward system of the brain. But I want to call out this one in particular. This is called Connecting the Dots, right? The name of this presentation. And in the work that I do in Y12SR, right? These are some of the dots that we connect, right? These are some of the dots that we connect, right? So here's this definition of addiction. Addictions and compulsions are destructive behaviors acquired as a method of coping with the pressures of life. Some addictions have genetic components and are passed down through biological families. Alcohol and drug addictions are examples. Addictions can often be linked to survival reactions in response to family trauma. Right now, I always stop here because if I had written this, this was written by a therapist, Stephen Errol, right? And if I had written this, I would have included more than family trauma, right? I would also include historical trauma. I would include institutional trauma, right? I would even include personal trauma, right? All of those things, personal trauma, maybe even unrelated to family. So I would suggest that there are a few other things that go in there too, right, as well. So, but then he says, addictions and eating disorders can have roots in emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. Addictions like overwork, gambling, overspending, smoking, and compulsive exercise appear to be the result of bad habits. And then there's this sentence, right? Most addictive behaviors are maladaptive responses to unresolved trauma, right? Connecting that with trauma, right? Um, I like this definition because it speaks to both nature and nurture, right? It speaks to genetic components, right? It speaks to both nature and nurture. And it's interesting because even the science of biology has begun to come to grips with this less binary way of thinking, right? We talked about the binary framework. Even science is beginning to come to grips with this, right? So this is talking about epigenetics, which is a branch of biology that studies how behaviors and environment can cause changes in gene expression, right? How changes in behaviors and environment cause changes in gene expression, right? I love this picture here. The reason that this picture's here, and really I'm not gonna have time to go into the complete story, which I do in my training, but this is my granddaughter that we're looking at here, right? And I love telling this story because she is an example of maybe the buck stops here, right? This is quickly, I'll tell this a little bit of the story. This is her at her first prom. She's now 24 years old, and she's at her first prom, right? And the whole family's in the yard, and it's just such this beautiful occasion, except for my daughter and I, right? And we're crying uncontrollably. And the tears seem to be incongruent with the occasion. It was a joyous occasion, and the tears weren't matching the occasion. Right. So later on, they went off, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, why I was reacting this way, what was going on. And so later on, they went off to the prom. I went home and I recognized, right? I never got to go to a prom because I was in the throes of my own addictive behavior. And my daughter never got to go to a prom because she was in the throes of my addictive behavior, right? And in that moment, I recognized, oh my God, maybe the buck really stops here. My grandbaby gets to go to a prom, right? Maybe the changes that I've chosen, maybe the changes that my daughter has chosen makes it so the buck really can stop here. Now, I can't read genes, right? But here's what I know. I know her life looks a whole lot different at 24 than mine did, or my daughter's did at 24. So maybe the buck stops here. Maybe the deep level of work, right, reflects later, reflects in a different way later. And so this to me was the example of epigenetics. And I love this last sentence on this slide. It says, even though the sequence of DNA is fixed, right? Because the sequence is fixed, right? But how a gene within that fixed sequence can be turned on or off within that fixed sequence, right? Epigenetics says that can be a factor of behavioral, right, or environmental change, right? So even though the sequence of the DNA is fixed, how the genes are turned on and off within that sequence depends on the quality of our awareness, right? And there's such hope in that for me, right? Because that's what yoga works with, right? Is deepening and deepening and deepening our levels of awareness, right? Doing that work, right? With those samskaras, chipping away to get back to the originality of the love and light and substratum that we are, right? We're little pieces of wholeness from wholeness. We just had all this shit. Oops, sorry. It was going to happen sooner or later, right? All this
I
stuff.
think you're allowed to say that here.
Oh, yay! Yay.
Say shit all you want, love.
It was going to happen, right? All this shit is dumped on top of us, right? All this conditioning, right? All of this stuff dumped on top of us, right? We can do something about that. All right, so addiction, right? And I'm going to try and talk for about, I think I got till 9:30. So we're going to try and take this another 15 minutes or so. And then I'd love to open up for comments and questions and things like that in our chat. So this again comes from that treatment center that I was speaking about a little bit earlier, Shades of Hope. And we use this during Family Week, right? To explain addiction in families, right? So you see the umbrella and it's got a ton of stuff in the cover of the umbrella, right? Even some things I always say, damn it, too. I can say that one too, right? So, you got things in here, of course, like drugs and alcohol, work, right? Work is an addiction, right? Um, Exercise. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of these things, right? Until I take them out of balance. This being wants homeostasis. It wants yoga, union, integration, right? It wants homeostasis, right? And what I've noticed is I can take anything out of homeostasis, right? Work is fabulous and wonderful, right? And then it starts affecting my family, right? Then it starts affecting my nervous system. And then I take it to a hyper condition, right? Or I can take it to a hypo condition, right? And homeostasis, that's that place right in the middle. That's middle path, right? That's a place of balance and middle path. And so any of these, nothing wrong with any of these, right? I always say there are people really who can drink, right? I'm not one of them. I'm my nervous because we're bio individual beings. They're bio individual beings. And it takes me to know my bio individual. What I know is that my bio individual being will not withstand alcohol, right? I know that today, just like some can't eat gluten, for example, right? That's won't work for their bio individual being, right? So it's the same with all of this. It is that same thing with all of this. Work, right? I always put in there shopping, damn it, because I love to shop, right? But I know I can get a hit off buying a purse at Nordstrom's, like I got at one point off cocaine, right? Feels really good. And I get it, got that bag, right? And I think it's going to make me whole and complete and a wonderful human being again, right? I know some of you know what I'm talking about there, right? I know it's not just me, right? And then I do the same thing. I wake up the next day and it's like I got a hangover. I shouldn't have bought that, right? I don't have the money, right? It's like I got a hangover, right? Out of balance again, right? But again, the real deal with this one is that one at the center, and it's power and control. It's power and control, right? I my desire to manipulate outcomes, right? I look to manipulate outcomes, right? This delusion of power and control. And ultimately, what we're saying here, and this from, more of a yogic lens, a yogic perspective, guess what? Anything that I use to escape a perceived intolerable reality is something that could turn into an addiction, right? Yoga says stay present. It says stay present, right? And anything that I use to escape the present moment, right, has the possibility to turn into something that could be an addiction, right? If I keep returning to that to avoid the present moment, right? That is something that has the possibility to turn into an addiction, right? And I always love this one. This says the umbrella is covering something. I'm doing this, I'm using this and all of that to cover something, to cover something. And I love these words. We use them even similarly in trauma and core pain, right? Often in the treatment world, we would call it core pain, but underneath there, there's trauma. And that brings us to the Sanskrit word ama. Ama comes from the Ayurveda, right? The yogic medical world of Ayurveda, right? And I'm going to define that for us in a moment, but keep that in mind. The umbrella is covering something. And here's the deal with that. If that is left unaddressed, if the core pain is left unaddressed, we play whack-a-mole, right? We whack one mole down and another one pops up and I whack that down. And I played whack-a-mole for years, right? Dealt with the drugs and alcohol. That went down. And then it became shopping. That popped up, right? Worked on that. Then it became relationships, right? Worked on that. And then, and play whack-a-mole back and forth and back and forth. And until we get underneath, then really the depth of healing, I'll play whack-a-mole for years, right? Now, we're talking about this at a personal level, right? But I want you to begin, one of the things that we do and love to do in Y2SR is expand the definition of addiction, right? Expand the definition of addiction, right? And see how this same thing applies at a cultural level, right? We'll whack one thing down and then the other one pops up. And then we'll whack another thing down and another one pops up, right? Even in the area of, of healing racism, it's the same thing, right? We'll whack one down and another one pop up, right? So the same metaphor can apply. This is AMA, which I love, right? So this is a definition of it, right? AMA really says anything that's left. And in this case, we're speaking at the personal level in our 5-body system, right? We talked about those 5 bodies, right? That there's the physical, the emotional, the mental, the character, and the heart. And Ayurveda says that anything that's left in our 5-body system in a state of incomplete transformation, right? Anything that's left there turns into a toxin. It turns into a poison, right? The word itself literally means uncooked, undissolved, unfinished, right? Incomplete, all of those things, right? And you can think about this from even just the physiological perspective. Like me last night, I got an example from last night. I ate something that didn't agree with me last night, right? And so I spent most of the night at the Porcelain Queen, most of the night at the Porcelain Queen. And had that not been resolved, right? Exactly what I was prepared to get up and do, and it's not totally resolved yet. And maybe what I will do is run out to the nearest CVS, right? I have to drive back to where I live today. So I don't want to do that in pain. So in order to relieve that pain, I may hit the nearest pharmacy and I'll probably find some Maalox or something like that to relieve this pain, right? Right. And so that's what we do, right? And that is relief. But I can't confuse the relief with the resolve, right? Right. So the point in this is, what if that's an undissolved food in my belly? What if it is an undigested experience in life? right? An undigested experience of, I want to do the same thing. It hurts. That doesn't feel good. I want to get it away from the pain, right? And guess what? Drugs and alcohol, numbing out on TV, all of those things, they work for a minute. They work for a minute, right? And that is relief versus resolve, right? And until we get at resolve, right? Until we get underneath it, right? There's not a possibility for that healing to occur. All right, I'm gonna stop the share here. And again, invite you to pause and take a moment, right? Just look around the space where you are. This is deep and heavy material that we're covering, and we're covering it really at a cursory level, just from that introduction. And I know it is. So I want to invite you to just take a moment, root, ground, take a deep breath, notice what's present, notice what's present without judgment, right? Simply being aware and being aware of being aware. And then when you're ready, take another big deep breath in and exhale, let it out. I love doing that. All right. So, really briefly, we are going to have a conversation around trauma, right? And I know you guys have been in this conversation. So, taking that and knowing that, again, not a regular level of depth, right, with this. However, I love bringing that up because even sometimes, again, saying the word trauma brings a sense of angst or brings a sense of activation or, sometimes a sense of trigger, right? And that happens as we time travel, right? Whenever I'm feeling a sense of angst, whenever I'm feeling anything in that level of sensation, I'm no longer present, right? I have time traveled someplace. And it has to be that way, right? This is this lovely phrase, right? If it's hysterical, it is historical. It has to be. It has to be. If it's, I'm no longer here, I've gone someplace else. If I was present, there wouldn't be a reference point that would activate that sense within me. There would be no reference point for it. So that is happening in relationship to something that is already stored in this database, in this mind database. Is happening as a result of that, right? And knowing that if it's hysterical, it's historical, and that I've time traveled someplace, I can use some tools to bring me back in the present moment, because the present moment is the only place where healing can occur. Healing can occur in the past. It can't occur in the present, in the future. It can only occur in the present moment, right? So the first thing to do is bring myself back present, right? And one way of doing that is reconnecting with breath, reuniting breath and mind, because you can't breathe in the past and you can't breathe in the future. You can only breathe in the present moment, right? So when my mind and my breath are united, I have to be in present time. When mind and breath unite, right? I'm in present moment, right? So just think about that as we move in this. Use tools if, there's a sense of activation, if there's a sense of anything, right? So, you know, thinking about that, a traumatized nervous system doesn't understand time, right? When I'm in that sense, a traumatized nervous system hasn't, time's a concept that is understood by a part of the brain that is often offline when there's a sense of angst, when there's a sense of dysregulation in our nervous system. And like we said before, when everything's offline in that way, it is uh, uh, my nervous system will do anything to come back online. Sometimes I'll drink or drug or overeat or numb out on TV, right? All of those things, right? In order to come back online for that moment. And I'm again gonna just take a moment and bring up another set of slides as we speak about this really briefly. I love this, right? This is my teacher in the somatic experiencing work, Dr. Peter Levine, which in this from one of his first books, I think this was the first book, Waking the Tiger. And here's the quote from that book. On a broad level, trauma is anything in one's life experience that remains trapped and unresolved, causing disturbances at the biological, physiological, emotional, mental, and behavioral levels. Right. And I love that. Right. I love that because if you think about the biological, physiological, emotional, mental, and behavioral levels, it looks a whole lot like the yogis talk about as the five bodies, right? That would be a way that I really could describe the five bodies. And then what it says is anything from anyone's life experience that remains trapped and unresolved, which is what we were just speaking to relative to ama, anything that lies undigested, anything that lies unresolved, incomplete, right? Across the five body systems, according to now what we're speaking to in this whole new domain, that's the definition of trauma. That's the definition of trauma. And I love that. Traumatic events challenge and overwhelm our capacity to cope and respond physically and or emotionally, right? And different types of trauma, as we've been speaking to. I love the work of Resmaa Menakem, right? And, he talks about the HIP theory, historical, intergenerational, persistent institutional, personal trauma, right? And there's shock or big T trauma, developmental, relational, systemic, cultural, institutional, all of these, right? And trauma is not a flaw or weakness, right? A tool for survival. And it's not purely an emotional response. Trauma happens in the body and it's not an event. Trauma is the body's protective response. It's something that happens in the body, something that happens too fast, too much, and too soon, right? And this is the work of Bessel van der Kolk, right? The body keeps score. But I'm referencing here the work of Ida Rolf. And Ida Rolf is, this comes from the body work modality of Rolfing, which is very deep work with connective tissue in the body, right? And what this quote says here from Ida Rolf, all bodies record the physical, emotional traumata of living, the happenings of life, right? Your body records everything that comes in via your five senses. It's recorded, right? Everything that comes in, right? And emotional trauma is energy that collects somewhere, right? It often creates knots and tensions in our body, right? When I go to a massage therapist, she spends all this time, she calls them milk duds in my shoulders, and she just spends all, and it's just energy that's collected there. Nothing can move through. The energy can't move, right? And so it coagulates, right there, right? For me, that's one of the places for me, right? And so here's the point again, the issues live in our tissues. The issues live in our tissues. That's been a theme for 112SR. 112SR was actually really formalized as curriculum back in 2003, 2004. And this has been our theme, right? From the moment we started. The issues live in our tissues, right? So I'm not going to have time to go through this as much as I like to, but this is the Panchamaya Kosha model, right? This comes from the Taittiriya Upanishads. And I love connecting these dots with yoga philosophy and working toward healing, right? So this speaks of those five bodies. The Annamaya Kosha, our physical body, which is the body made of food, right? We are what we eat. There's the energy body, which is the pranamaya kosha, right? When you go to the doctor, your doctor takes vitals, right? Measuring energy in our body. There's the manomaya kosha. Mano in Sanskrit means mind, right? This is the intellectual mind whose function is to coordinate sensory input, right? There's the Vijnana kosha. So those three are those outward facing bodies. The other two are the inward facing bodies, right? Vijnana, things a little, where our values, right? Where our psycho-emotional states, character, all of those things. And then the Anandamaya kosha, which is our heart body and spiritual heart rather than blood pump, is what we're speaking to. The heart that is the seat of love and joy and intimacy and devotion and all of those things. And what the ancients say is that when there's a sense of connection and alignment between and among all those bodies, then there's we walk in the world in more of a sense of wholeness. But when the bodies are disconnected or misaligned or any of that, right? Then our walk in the world is more in disconnection. There's this beautiful quote from T.S. Eliot, and the quote is, "Hell is the place where nothing connects. Hell is the place where nothing connects," right? And so that's the idea. When we're connected and aligned, we're walking in more of a sense of wholeness. When we're misaligned, right, we're in this sense of disconnect. It's much more easy for disease, dysfunction, disharmony to enter into our system, right? Much more prevalent. All right, just this one real quickly, and then I'm gonna stop after this one, right? So the ancients say this is the root of a problem, the root of the problem, the root of the problem. And this is introduced in the Yoga Sutras around Yoga Sutra 2.4, right? And the model that's introduced there is called the kleshas, right? And the kleshas are known as the seeds of disconnection, the seeds of disconnection. And I'm not going to speak to all of these here, right? But I do just want to take a moment and talk about the root of the problem, right? And the root is avidya, avidya. Vidya in Sanskrit means knowledge. And when you put the A in front of it, it makes it the opposite, not knowledge, right? Sometimes it's translated as ignorance, right? And I always love to think about this. It's not ignorance like sometimes we relate to the word stupid or something like that. This is the ignorance of recognizing that are being unwilling to recognize that I don't know what I don't know, right? That there's no possible way that I can know it all, that this is a limited database and I'm an individuation, right? I don't even know what I don't know, right? It's that level. It's a false understanding, right? It's that level. It's that level. And again, the idea of this, I love again to go back to Ayurveda. There's a word in Ayurveda, and I'll probably mispronounce it, right? But it speaks of the root cause of all disease, right? And I'm going to pronounce it as best I can. I'm not great at Sanskrit pronunciation. I love the study, but I'm not great at pronunciation. I always make the joke, my Sanskrit pronunciation sometimes sounds like the line out of the Beyonce song, a little bit of Alabama and a little bit of Louisiana, right? So forgive me. But the word as I understand it is prajna parada. And what that means is crimes against wisdom, crimes against wisdom, right? And that says that this is the root cause of all disease, right? And again, I would assert all addiction, including the addiction to power and control, right? Including racism, sexism, all of those things, right? That relate to crime against wisdom, crime against wisdom, right? So I'm going to just again close this up. I wish I had a moment to go a little further into the cliches. This is the root of the problem. It really is the root of the problem. And it's one that I have to remind myself of all the time. Humility is another one of those very important qualities to cultivate for sustainable recovery, right? And humility to me is remembering that, I don't even know what I don't know, right? I don't even know what I don't know, right? And the lens of my subjective reality in this moment is governed by the matrix, right? And here's the beauty of that. It's again, once I acknowledge that, you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. So once I acknowledge that, right, then there's a possibility to metabolize and transcend it, right? This recognition again, while I always say, I wish this was my quote, but I believe it belongs to Jesus, right? The idea is we're in this, we live in it, and we don't have to be of it. We don't have to be of it. There are tools that we can use while we're in it. We can't avoid it or bypass it or run away from it, right? We're in it and we don't have to be of it. Right. So I'm gonna stop this here. The question, just speak this real quick. It becomes how do we heal? Because we're in this, right? And I love this. I would assert that what Patanjali is saying in the Yoga Sutras, and this goes both individually and collectively, right? It says examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom, right? It's examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom. And this conditioning runs deep. It runs deep on so many levels, right? Examining, and we have to be conditioned by the matrix, right? The job for us, the way I love to describe it is the way I have heard Michelangelo talked about creating the David, right? I was told that the story is Michelangelo saw this block of stone and he said, basically, David's in there, right? David's in there. And he said, my job is chipping away all that is not David, right? And that's us. To get back to the pure love, the pure light, which is who we are, right? Which is who we are. The job is chipping away at all this conditioning that has been put on top of us or that we brought in with us, right? Because we do bring things in with us, right? So the job is chipping away at all that stuff to get back to who it is that we really are, right? To heal addiction, both at a personal and collective level, right? Addiction to power, addiction to control, all of that. The job is chipping away at all that is not who we truly are. So with that, I'm giving us not a lot of time, but I'm hopeful that maybe there's something in the comments or questions or any of that good stuff relative to this. I'm seeing Vicky and Francis.
Okay, sure. Vicky or Vical.
Okay, thank you. Just let me unmute. Thank you so much, Miss Nikki Myers. I so appreciate you and the space and the space that we hold all together. My question is in regards to the comment on anything that we use to escape the present moment. Our reality has a possibility to turn into an addiction. So my question is, what about when you realize that it was a deep, intimate relationship that was used in that way, and trying to understand the ands of like the parts of ourselves that were coming from a place of true love and like true compassion, and then the parts of ourselves that were trauma bonding and that we're trying to release that codependency to like move forward with that relationship, because there's a part of us that doesn't want to let it go, but there's a part of us that knows that parts of it needs to be let go.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for asking. Right, right. So one of the other workshops that I love to do really relates specifically to that question. And the title of the workshop is this compassion or is it codependence? The wisdom to know the difference, right? There's a fine line between compassion and codependence, right? And being in the inquiry of what that line is for any of us, right, is a really, really, really worthy investigation, because it can be easy to confuse being compassionate with being codependent. And as a matter of fact, I think I'm doing this workshop pretty soon. So I'll give you some information about how to do it. But it comes back to, in many ways, exactly what we've been speaking to relative to my body, right? There's an energy and a feeling in my body when I am compassionate that feels open. It feels responsive. There's just a feeling in me when I'm in compassion. When I'm in codependence, again, it feels closed. I can feel what's going on in my body. So a lot of ways tuning back into the body is a way to look at that, right? Codependence feels depleting, right? It feels that way. So coming back to the body is a really good way. We're doing that workshop relatively soon. So I would invite you. Yeah, yeah. And I love you brought up codependence, period. The way that we look at codependence in the Y12SR work, in the general Y12SR, at a personal level, codependency is the disease of the lost self, right? Anytime I look outside of myself for something that can only come from the inside, I can be in a codependent relationship with whatever that is. Like I said, I've been in codependence with Nordstrom's, right? So anytime I look outside of myself from something that can only come from the inside, right? So yeah, yeah. So with the plenty of ways, that's one of my favorite curriculum of work to look at. So if you look on y12sr.com, it'll give you some information about when we're doing that next work. Thanks for asking that, Vicki.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Should we do one more and then we can land?
Yeah.
Francis.
Overtime. I hate that. Francis?
Hi. Hi from Manila, Philippines.
Wow,
so you got excited, Nikki. That's my line of work that I do. I work with women in the women's dorm of a treatment rehab center that's government run. Sorry, you're hearing my resident lizard. Yeah, amazing your lecture. That's like a 1 week workshop right there. From just gave me PTSD of my 200-hour training book review of Hatha yoga, and so what I wanted to talk to you about, which is also a big discussion in itself. I'm moving more towards harm reduction, and so the mentors I look to are Gabor Mate and Tatarski at New School of Research in New York. He's come to the Philippines and I've had lectures with him. So their move away from that model of addiction as a disease. So here it's not accepted. The government doesn't want to accept it. And a lot of organizations, including the NA, they're quite against that whole model because their whole thing is sobriety. But so that was my question, like you were saying the same things that Gabor says about the whole thing of the issue of addiction is with the internal relationship. It's not necessarily the external. Like he talks about his addiction to classical music, etc. But then he goes on to say that addiction is like it's neither choice nor an inherited disease. Because for him, it serves a purpose in people's lives. It gives you comfort, distraction from pain, a soothing of stress, etc., etc. So it serves a valid purpose for him. And segue to that, I've been wanting to do the yoga of recovery with Durga Lila.
Yes.
But it got interrupted by COVID. So, and with Swami Sita Rananda. So,
Yes. Durga's a dear friend, right?
Yeah, I saw a video of you at the Sivananda Center.
Yeah, exactly.
And the harm reduction.
Yeah. And I love again to the approach of the and, right? That and even and harm reduction, right? And this and that. I am of I come from the perspective that we need all the tools that we can possibly get in this battle, right? With something that, like I was saying, in the United States in 2020, we laid 90,000 souls away, right? And that's the biggest pandemic before and after COVID, right? 90,000 in 1 year. And we need all the tools and approaches that we need, a framework and a container that can include all the possible tools and approaches, right? Because for some people, the disease model works, right? For some people, so I don't think it's a one size fits all, that we've got to have a way that to invite in a container that can look at this from many possible approaches and many possible perspectives. And so that's what I continue to work toward and continue to and harm reduction fits in that, right? The disease model fits in that. From the yogic perspective, right? All of those are simply approaches in order to work with it. And it's not really the root of the problem, right? None of that is really the root of the problem, right? And so getting more toward the actual root is the lens through which, at least in this moment, we work to broaden the whole thing. Does that make sense, Francis? I think you're still muted.
Yeah, the whole inclusive thing, but it's just that, each one is trying to map out territory, because I guess, a lot of it has to do with funding. So you do know resources are scarce. So rather than there being collaborative effects here back home, it isn't. And then, our dangerous drugs board sits on the fence and, plays ball with each one, but never gives clear mandate. Yeah. And then, we had issues with the extrajudicial killings also here. It was going on for a while.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. I'd love to come and study with you. So
thank you. I'd love to see you. I want to thank you all. I know we're a little bit over time, but again, I want to thank Scott and Embodied Lab and the whole 9 yards, and thank each and every one of you. Something I heard a long time ago, right? You know, the fact that you're here and you spent your time and your money and your energy and all of that, I'm so grateful for it that I don't even, you know, this fuels me. So I want to thank you to continue in this work and continue doing everything we possibly can to bring healing to something that's so deadly. So thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Nikki. We're so grateful for having you and your beautiful wisdom. I think my new favorite quote is, I wish I would have come up with that quote, but I believe it was Jesus.
Yes.
Maybe my new favorite quote. So thank you so much for that quote, and for just, it's such a beautiful blessing to have you and to be in presence with you, and
I
so thank
love
you.
it. Takes one to know one, Dr.
Aw.
Lyons. Takes one to know one. Yeah, yeah. So I'm really, really grateful for you and your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us live.